Maple Grove was a sleepy corner of a small Midwestern town, where the days moved slowly and the nights whispered secrets. The houses, relics of the 1950s, stood in neat rows along tree-lined streets. Their lawns trimmed, their shutters painted, their lives laid bare for anyone who cared to look. Our house, a weathered two-story with peeling paint and a porch that creaked underfoot, was the outlier, a testament to the chaos my sister Sophie and I had brought with us when we moved here 2 years ago. I'd come to escape the wreckage of a divorce that had left me hollow, while Sophie, 3 years younger, had fled a job that drained her spirit. We'd wanted a fresh start, a place to heal, but instead we found a mystery living across the street. A man whose open window revealed a world we couldn't ignore. Every woman who visited him left dazed, transformed as if they'd stepped into something extraordinary. Curiosity consumed us, and when we finally knocked on his door, it was clear he'd been expecting us, as if our arrival was inevitable. Our house was a cluttered sanctuary, its walls lined with mismatched furniture and memories we hadn't yet unpacked. The living room with its sagging couch and faded curtains was where Sophie and I spent most of our evenings sipping wine and trading stories about the life we'd left behind. I was 35, still piecing myself together after my ex-husband's betrayal, a wound that lingered like a bruise. Sophie, at 32, was restless, her dark eyes always searching for something she couldn't name. We were close bound by shared pain and a fierce loyalty that had carried us through the worst of times. But lately, our conversations had revolved around one thing: the man across the street, whose quiet presence had become an obsession. It started months ago on a warm summer night, when I'd been sitting on the porch, a glass of wine in hand, trying to quiet the noise in my head. A woman had stepped out of his house, her hair dishevelled, her steps unsteady, a dreamy smile on her face. I'd called Sophie out, half joking, and we'd watched as she stumbled to her car, her expression one of stunned satisfaction. That was the first time. But it wasn't the last. Night after night we'd see different women arrive, confident, laughing, their voices carrying across the street, only to leave hours later, their faces flushed, their movements slow, as if they'd been through something life-altering. We'd sit by our front window, the curtains parted just enough, whispering theories about what made him so different. He was in his mid-50s, unassuming, with a quiet demeanour that belied the effect he had on those who crossed his threshold. He wasn't flashy, didn't drive a fancy car, or host loud parties. He was just there, a magnetic enigma who drew women to his door and left them changed. I thought back to a night a year ago when Sophie and I had nearly lost each other to our own struggles. I'd been drowning in anger, consumed by the betrayal of my ex, while Sophie had been spiralling, her confidence eroded by a job that demanded everything and gave nothing back. We'd sat on the porch sharing a bottle of whiskey and promised to rebuild together, to find a way to feel alive again. That promise had brought us here to Maple Grove, but it was the man across the street who made us feel something new. A spark of curiosity, a hunger for something beyond the ordinary. Watching him became our secret ritual, a guilty pleasure that grew into an obsession. We'd joke about it, but there was an edge to our laughter, a question we couldn't ignore. What was it about him that left every woman so shaken? That night, I was about to head upstairs when his bedroom light flicked on, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. I stopped mid-step, one hand on the banister, my breath catching in my throat. He wasn't alone. A woman stood near the window, already halfway undressed, her dress slipping off her shoulders with an ease that suggested familiarity. She leaned into him, her hands on his chest, while he stood calm and still, as if time bent to his will. "Sophie?" I called, my voice low but urgent. You need to see this. Sophie wandered in a blanket wrapped around her, her dark hair messy from lounging on the couch. What? She asked, her voice thick with sleep. I pointed without turning. He's at it again? She sighed. Emma, come on. But when she glanced out the window, her eyes widened. Sleep forgotten. Through the glass we could see everything. The woman's back was against the wall now, his hand braced beside her head. He leaned in, whispering something, and she laughed, then went quiet, as he slowly lifted her thigh, guiding her closer. Sophie covered her mouth, her voice a whisper. We shouldn't be watching this. And yet, I said, grinning, we are. We stood there motionless, pressed close to the window like teenagers spying on something forbidden. He moved slowly as if he'd done this 1,000 times. Her reactions no longer surprising him. She clung to him, her head rolling back her legs, shaky. When he turned her around, she held the window frame as if it were the only thing keeping her steady. Sophie shifted beside me, her blanket slipping slightly. Is that the same woman from last week? Nope, I said, my eyes still on the scene. That's a new one. 5th or 6th this month, I think. Sophie shook her head, but her gaze didn't waver. That's insane, she muttered. I leaned closer, my voice a whisper. I'm telling you. They come in confident, laughing, flirting, and leave, looking like they've just been through something they'll never forget. We watched as the woman tensed her mouth, dropping open her jaw, slack, her eyes fluttering. He barely moved, but whatever he was doing had her holding on, her whole body, reacting. Sophie turned away, her cheeks flushed. Okay, that's enough. I didn't move my eyes, still locked on the window, a thrill running through me. You can't tell me you're not a little curious. She sat on the armrest, clutching her blanket tighter, her voice barely audible. I mean, he is kind of impressive. Kind of. I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet room. That man is a walking mystery. Mid-50s, barely says a word, never brags, and somehow has every woman in Maple Grove leaving his place like they just stepped out of a dream. Sophie bit her lip, her eyes darting to the floor, her hesitation palpable. I smiled, sensing the crack in her resolve. I want to know what that's like. She laughed nervously, her voice shaky. You're not serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said, leaning against the wall, my heart racing with the possibility. Not tonight, but tomorrow I might go over there. Say hi, introduce myself. Sophie's eyes widened, her blanket slipping further. You're going to what? Knock on his door and ask for a sample. Maybe I'll borrow sugar? I said, grinning. Or ask if he needs help carrying something heavy. Whatever works. Sophie stood, her blanket still clutched tight, her voice rising. You're out of your mind. Emma, I know, I said, but admit it. You're wondering too. She didn't answer, just pulled the blanket tighter and looked away. But I could see the spark of curiosity in her eyes, the same one that had drawn me in. The next morning I woke with one thought stuck in my head. Him. I didn't feel guilty about watching. If anything, I was more curious than ever. What was it about him that left every woman so shaken? Sophie, on the other hand, acted as if last night hadn't burned itself into her brain. She was still in her pyjamas, curled up on the couch with a bowl of cereal, pretending nothing had happened. I leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a grin tugging at my lips. So I said casually, "I'm thinking, now's a good time." She didn't look up, her spoon pausing mid-air. "Good time for what?" "You know what I said?" My grin widening. She sighed, already bracing herself. "You were serious." "Completely," I replied, grabbing my keys from the counter. Sophie groaned, setting her bowl down with a clatter. "You cannot just knock on some man's door because you liked what you saw through his window." "First of all," I said, walking over, "it's not just what I saw. It's what we've seen repeatedly, consistently, and last night sealed it." Sophie pulled the blanket over her head, her voice muffled. "I'm not going." "You don't have to do anything," I said, tugging the blanket down. "Just come with me, back me up. Maybe pretend I'm borrowing something." She peeked out, her eyes narrowing, her resolve crumbling. "Why do you even want me there?" "Because I said you'll keep me from doing something too bold, or you'll pressure me into doing something stupid. Either way, it'll be fun." She rolled her eyes, but stood, arms crossed tightly. Her hesitation, no match for my persistence. I tossed her a hoodie, and a few minutes later we were crossing the street, my heart thudding with anticipation, not nerves. Sophie stayed a step behind me, her hoodie pulled tight, as if it could shield her from what was coming. I knocked once, and the door creaked open almost immediately. He stood there barefoot, his shirt halfway buttoned, his hair still damp from a shower. The way he looked at us like he already knew exactly who we were, as if he'd been wondering when we'd finally show up, was unnerving. His eyes moved once from me to Sophie, then back again, calm and measured, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "Sorry to just show up. We were out for a walk, and figured we might as well say hi." Sophie stood just behind me, her arms crossed her hoodie, pulled tight as if she wanted to disappear into the fabric. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Nice of you to stop by." "We're Emma and Sophie," I added, gesturing across the street. "We live across the street." "I know," he said, his tone calm, but carrying a weight that suggested he didn't buy our excuse and didn't need to. He stepped aside, and we walked in the air inside, warm and soft, filled with the faint smell of coffee and the low hum of music playing in the background. A slow jazz that seemed to linger in the corners. The house was simple but inviting, with worn furniture and a few framed photos on the walls. Landscapes, not people, as if he preferred to keep his life private. On the counter were 2 glasses, one already full, the amber liquid catching the light. I raised an eyebrow, a playful challenge in my voice. "Expecting someone?" "Not really," he said, handing me a glass, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting moment, a spark that sent a shiver through me. Just figured I might have company. I shot Sophie a look. She pretended not to notice, hovering near the door, her eyes darting around the room, her discomfort palpable. I took a small sip, the whiskey smooth and warm, grounding me. "You're not what I pictured," I said, leaning against the counter, my curiosity burning brighter than ever. "Neither are you," he replied, his tone steady, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I smirked, undeterred. "And what did you picture?" People who watch that closely usually avoid eye contact. The next day, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, his words a quiet acknowledgement of our secret. Sophie flinched, her cheeks reddening, but I didn't blink. "You saw us," I said, my voice steady, a challenge of my own. "It's a window," he replied. "Not a one-way mirror." I laughed, quiet and sharp, the tension between us crackling fair. He dropped onto the edge of the couch, arms resting on his knees, completely at ease, as if strangers showing up at his door were just another Tuesday. Sophie still hadn't moved her hoodie. A makeshift armour, her eyes flicking between us. "You can go any time," he said gently, looking her way, his voice soft but firm, offering her an out. She didn't answer, just stayed where she was, her resolve wavering, her curiosity pulling her closer despite herself. I leaned on the back of the couch facing him, my heart racing with the thrill of what might come next. "You get a lot of fake excuses at your door." He looked up at me and smiled, calm and sure, his eyes glinting with something unreadable, something that made my pulse quicken. "I leave the window open for a reason." The words hung in the air, a quiet admission that shifted the room's energy, a confirmation that he knew exactly what he was doing, and that we'd been invited to see it. I didn't back away. I got closer. I leaned against him, one leg draped casually across his lap, my fingers resting lightly on his shoulder, testing the waters. He didn't move, just let his hand settle on my thigh, his touch warm and deliberate, as if he'd been expecting me to make the first move. Sophie's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and unsteady. "You're actually doing this?" I looked over at her, still standing near the door, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hands clutching the edges of her hoodie. "You act like I dragged you here," I said, my tone light but pointed. "You kind of did," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes darting between us. "Then go," I said simply, "or stay, and admit you're not just here for me." She shook her head, but her eyes stayed locked on his, her breath uneven, her hesitation crumbling under the weight of her own curiosity. I stood up, slowly, walked over and took her hand, feeling her pulse jump under my fingers, a frantic rhythm that betrayed her fear and fascination. "You don't have to do anything," I said quietly, my voice soft but firm. "But don't lie to yourself either." I guided her forward step by step, right in front of him. He looked up at her, calm, steady, unreadable, then leaned in and kissed her, his lips brushing hers with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes. Sophie let out a shaky breath, her body tensing, but after a heartbeat she pulled back. Her face flushed, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and longing. I didn't hesitate. I stepped in, brushing past her, and kissed him with full intent. No guessing, no pause, making it clear what I wanted. His hands moved to my hips, steady and deliberate, his touch grounding me, in the moment igniting something deep inside. When I leaned back, neither of us said a word, the silence thick with possibility. I reached for the hem of my dress, and he mirrored me. Our movements synchronized as if it weren't the first time we'd done this. We slipped out of our clothes, the fabric pooling at our feet, the air cool against my skin, a contrast to the heat building inside me. I moved closer, my hands still resting on him, tracking every change in his body, the way his shoulders tightened, how his grip tensed slightly against the cushion. I wanted to feel everything he was holding back, to understand the power that had left so many women undone. Behind me, something changed. He looked past me and offered a hand, his expression calm but inviting. Sophie stood there, still holding her dress like a shield, hovering between stepping forward and walking out. He didn't say a word, just nodded, a silent reassurance. Sophie moved toward us, slow, cautious, but not resisting her breath uneven. He kissed her again softly this time, and she didn't pull away. Her hesitation, melting under his touch. His hand slid behind her neck, grounding her, while his other hand helped ease the dress from her shoulders. It dropped without a sound, and her breath followed a soft gasp that broke the silence. I kept going, letting the rhythm guide me, my movements deliberate, focused. A dance I was only beginning to learn. Sophie joined me on the floor, still hesitant, her hands trembling slightly until he touched her cheek, guiding her with calm certainty. Our hands brushed briefly, both of us, focused on the same purpose, a shared exploration that felt both thrilling and inevitable. She was slower, more tentative, but grew bolder with each movement, her hesitation giving way to something bolder, something alive. When his head tipped back slightly, a subtle shift in his posture, I knew we were making progress, that we were unraveling the mystery we'd been chasing for months. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady, cutting through the haze. Both of you up. We stood together, our breaths uneven, our bodies humming with anticipation. He slid further into the couch, his arms resting wide, his presence commanding without effort a quiet power that drew us in. I climbed onto the cushions straddling him, slowly, shifting until I was exactly where I needed to be. The contact, sending a jolt through me. The moment his lips met my skin, my grip tightened, my fingers digging into his shoulders, anchoring me against the intensity. His movements were deliberate, focused, unrushed, endlessly skilled, each touch sending waves through me, tightening every nerve. I tilted my head back, breathing through it, letting the sensation consume me, letting it rewrite the rules I'd lived by for so long. Sophie lowered herself again, and I glanced down as she picked up where I'd left off her hands, finding their rhythm growing more confident as I guided her gently, a silent partnership forming between us. We moved together with shared purpose, his attention never faltering, every motion building on the last, sending waves through my legs, tightening everything in me. My balance wavered, but I didn't want him to stop, not when he was this close to undoing me completely. Then Sophie inhaled sharply, her breath catching a sound that pulled me back to the moment. He touched her, encouraging her up, his hand steady and sure. She stood and let him guide her into his lap, his hands steadying her at the waist, his touch a quiet anchor. I stepped back, brushing a hand along her spine as she settled above him, a gesture of reassurance, a reminder that we were in this together. She closed her eyes and let gravity do the rest, shifting slowly, adjusting with each motion, her movements tentative, but growing stronger. His hands supported her, one at her back, the other bracing her hips, guiding her with a certainty that made her breath turn uneven. She leaned in, gripping his shoulders for balance, as her movements grew bolder. More certain, her focus locked on him. Then her body tensed. Her head fell against him, her back arching just enough to show us everything we needed to know. A moment of release, raw and unguarded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He held her a moment longer, then stood with her in his arms and carried her to the cushions, lowering her with care. His movements gentle but deliberate, a contrast to the intensity that had come before. He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine, a silent question in his gaze, an invitation. I was ready to accept. I was already ready, facing away my breath, shallow, my body humming with anticipation, alive with the thrill of what we'd started. He stepped behind me and took hold, guiding us into a rhythm that took over without hesitation. A seamless continuation of what we'd built. His hands were sure, his pace steady but firm. Each movement pulling me deeper into the moment, erasing the world beyond this room. Sophie lay nearby, watching through half-closed eyes, still catching her breath. A faint smile on her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of what we'd shared. I smiled back. A shared understanding passing between us, a bond forged in this unexpected moment. Then the pressure shifted and I gasped, grabbing at the couch for balance, my fingers digging into the fabric, grounding me against the intensity. Every second pulled me deeper, his precision keeping me right on the edge. A place where thought dissolved and only sensation remained. When he angled just right, my back arched, and everything inside surged forward, a wave that hit fast and clean, shaking through me, leaving me trembling. I leaned forward, my eyes shut, barely holding together as he kept the pace steady, relentless, carrying me through the aftershocks. He didn't slow down. If anything, he was just getting started. His focus unbroken, his energy seemingly endless. He turned to Sophie, gently lifting her once again, and laying her flat on the cushions, his movements careful, but purposeful. She barely had a second before he joined her, moving with even more urgency, his attention as sharp as ever. I knelt beside them, wiping the sweat from her brow, trailing light kisses along his shoulder and chest. My touch a quiet anchor in the intensity, a way to stay connected to them both. Sophie's hand searched for mine. I held it tight, feeling her pulse race beneath my fingers, a mirror of my own. She moved with him again, faster this time, her body responding easily, rising to meet him. Her hesitation gone. She gripped the cushions, her breathing shifting, her reaction growing stronger with each moment building, without stopping a crescendo that seemed to pull us all along. I watched her closely, amazed my own body still buzzing from the aftershocks, alive with the energy of what we'd done. He kept going, focused, fierce, somehow, tireless, his stamina, not just impressive but overwhelming, as if he could keep this up forever, a force that defied explanation. At last he let out a quiet breath against her neck, a subtle sign he'd reached his limit, a moment of vulnerability that felt oddly intimate. Sophie lay completely still, her chest heaving, her eyes half closed, a dreamy haze settling over her, her face soft with something like peace. I curled up beside them, brushing strands of hair from her forehead, my own body still buzzing alive with the intensity of what we'd done. A fire that hadn't dimmed. I leaned closer and whispered with a grin, "Still think it was a bad idea?" She didn't answer right away, her breath still uneven, but a small laugh escaped her, soft and genuine, a sound that warmed me. We lay there for a moment, the room quiet, except for the faint hum of music and the distant sound of crickets outside. A world that felt far away. The weight of what we'd done settled over me, not heavy but warm, like a secret we'd chosen to carry together, a moment that had changed us. I thought back to the nights we'd spent watching him, the whispers and theories, the way our curiosity had grown into something undeniable. This wasn't just about him, it was about us. About stepping into something new, something that made us feel alive in a way we hadn't in years, a reclaiming of the spark we'd lost to life's grind. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Sophie was already up, moving quietly, her hair pulled back, her face calm but different, as if last night had left a mark she wasn't ready to name. I sat at the table, my mind replaying every moment the way his touch had felt, the way Sophie had let go of her hesitation, the way we'd moved together, fearless in that fleeting moment. But there was a new weight in my chest, a flicker of worry about what this meant for us, for our place in Maple Grove. What if someone found out? What if the neighbours we'd watched him with started whispering, turning our moment of liberation into gossip that could unravel the life we'd built here? My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Lisa, a friend who lived a few houses down, someone I'd known since we moved here. "Saw you crossing the street yesterday," she wrote. "Everything okay?" My heart thudded the words heavier than they should have been. Lisa was perceptive, the kind of person who noticed things others missed, her questions always carrying a hint of suspicion. I typed a quick reply. "Just saying hi to a neighbour." All good, but the unease lingered, a reminder that we'd crossed a line that our secret might not stay ours forever. That afternoon, as I was pulling weeds in the garden, another neighbour, Rachel, stopped by, her expression curious, her voice light but probing. "You and Sophie have been awfully quiet lately," she said, leaning against the fence, her eyes searching mine. "Something going on?" My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile, brushing dirt from my hands. "Just busy," I said, keeping my tone casual. "You know how it is?" She nodded, but her gaze lingered as if she could sense the truth I was holding back. When she left, I stood there, the garden tools forgotten, my mind racing. Rachel was close with some of the women we'd seen leaving his house. Women who might recognize us, who might talk. The thought sent a chill through me. But it also sparked something else, a defiance, a refusal to let fear dictate what we'd done. Later that day, I ran into one of those women at the grocery store, a brunette named Karen, who'd left his house a few weeks ago. Her face flushed, her steps unsteady. She was pushing a cart down the aisle, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment, before she looked away, her cheeks reddening. I hesitated, then approached, my voice low. "Karen, right?" She nodded, her expression guarded. "I live across from him," I said, choosing my words carefully. Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing between us. "You've been there?" she said. Not a question, but a statement, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, and for a moment we stood there, two women bound by a shared secret, a moment of understanding that needed no words. "It's different, isn't it?" she said finally, her voice soft, almost reverent. I smiled, my unease easing. "Yeah, it is." When I got home, Sophie was on the couch, a book in her lap, but her eyes were distant, lost in thought. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice soft, echoing the question that had been circling in my mind. I sat beside her, the weight of the day settling between us. "We live with it," I said, my voice steady. "We chose this, and it's ours. No one gets to take that away." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips, a spark of the same defiance I felt. As night fell, I stood by the window, looking across the street. His house was dark, the window closed, but the memory of what we'd done lingered, a touchstone for the fire we'd rediscovered. Maple Grove might whisper and secrets might slip, but Sophie and I were stronger for it, our bond forged in a moment of fearless exploration. Whatever came next, gossip, judgment, or acceptance, we'd face it together as we always had. our hearts alight with the knowledge of what we dared to claim.